Hi, everyone. It's Lisa Danforth, and I am here with Darcy Holm from Moving Mountains Healing. And May is Mental Health Month. We're going to be focusing the conversation around no stigma, mental health, having those conversations that are so difficult to have, and really sort of putting some names and some words to the emotions that we are feeling today. So, Darcy, thank you so much for joining us. I'm super excited for whatever's going to be coming out of this
Yeah,
conversation.
I am too. Thank you, honestly, so much for having me. It's an incredibly important conversation. Yes, it's Mental Health Awareness Month, but also a year of a pandemic, and so much has kind of changed over the past year. So I think it's a pivotal conversation. I appreciate you taking it up.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so excited for you to share. What I'm going to do right now, though, is jump in and read a little bit about your bio so people know who you are, all of that information. So I'm going to just sort of jump in and say Darcy is a licensed mental health counselor, and she's a nationally certified counselor who's been practicing for 4 years and working in the field of mental health since 2012. Her background in inpatient and outpatient facilities has provided her the opportunity to work with various ages and mental health diagnoses, including addiction, anxiety, we'll be talking a lot about today, adolescent treatment, trauma, eating disorders, personality disorders, and couples and family issues. Her private practice, she centers her focus around helping those in the LGBTQ plus communities and those struggling with anxiety, as well as couples counseling. Darcy is intensively trained in the dialectical behavior therapy and strives to provide tangible skills to her clients while working hard to help the clients better understand themselves and live authentically. You can't ask for more than that, can you?
No, they seem like lofty goals, but I assure you they are achievable.
Yeah, well, we've got to have those lofty goals, right? So
Yeah.
we can at least go for them. We keep them small, we're going to achieve those. So,
Right. Yeah, it's definitely good to set the bar high.
so let's just jump right in if you're okay with that.
Go for it.
All right. So what is going on these days with the anxiety? What's going on with us? If you could just sort of share some of your insights and put some words to it.
Yeah, over the past, I mean, obviously with the pandemic, anxiety has risen, depression has risen, addiction rates, relapse rates. Uh, the toll it's taken on mental health is almost immeasurable to a point. Even especially on kids in schools, parents who are trying to balance kids that are home and trying to work, people who are balancing having lost their jobs. Unfortunately, really early on in the pandemic, they did a study and they were just kind of trying to look at where are people at? What is the mental health toll? And it was done, I think, in like April or May of last year. And already they saw an increase in people struggling. And so we could probably multiply that out, the number of months. But yeah, the anxiety rates were typically around the 20% mark in the American population. It is already one of the most common mental health diagnoses. And then with the pandemic, it's risen to above 30. And so in some states, people were indicating almost 50% of the population was struggling with some symptoms. And so it really is something that needs to be talked about. It's something that thankfully the stigma has been taken away a lot. So that also accounts for rising rates over the last few years, which is great. But then you add in things like social media, expectations, deadlines, professional requirements, and just sort of this push in society, do more, be more, do this, do that. And
Perfect.
yeah, perfectionism is one of the biggest drivers. And so it's, unfortunately, there's just a lot of things that are driving anxiety rates really high.
One of the questions that I really want to ask and discuss today is I think many of the symptoms we don't think of as anxiety symptoms. So we just sort of, put it on the back shelf, plow on through, and then we're not dealing with that struggle. Can you share several of the symptoms that people may not quite recognize as anxiety?
Yeah, so even just generalized anxiety, the DSM kind of gives this blanket definition of it's excessive fear or worry that we can't regulate, right? And so the emotional root of anxiety is fear and worry. And so then it starts to turn into increased heart rate, muscle tension, worrying more days than not, and they give that threshold of about 6 months, which is flexible. Yeah, right. You tend to start seeing avoidance patterns, right? So we start avoiding the things that we think are giving us anxiety. Just a lot of kind of those physiological symptoms. People don't even realize that anxiety drives a lot of GI issues. It drives stomach upset. It drives acid reflux. It drives autoimmune issues. It exacerbates it if we don't know how to respond to stress. So there's quite a bit that kind of goes into it that people don't tend to realize. They think, oh, it's stress. And stress is normal. It's a natural part of life. Yes. If your stress is lasting weeks on end, months on end, then it starts to become kind of that like, hey, it might be something a little bit more serious. This might be something that you don't have the skills to regulate. And so, I would definitely encourage people to come in if they find themselves experiencing that, issues with sleeping, issues with eating, and so it kind of starts to really, when you put it all together and people kind of really start to say, oh, yes, that's, it's imperative that people know what the symptoms are, because it kind of overlaps sometimes with daily stressors.
I absolutely agree. I know back in the holidays, like between Thanksgiving and Christmas, I was really struggling. I lived by myself. We're in quarantine, so I was doing so much by myself. And a friend of mine said, I think you might be struggling with a little COVID depression. I was like, no, not at all. Right. But then when I stepped back and looked at it, I was like, there is definitely something going on there.
Yeah.
And what was amazing for me was just naming it.
Mm-hmm.
Just alleviated a bunch of the stress, the anxiety, because I had a reason for why I was feeling the way that I was feeling.
Yeah, that's been huge. A lot of people struggling with COVID depression, and I wrote a blog on it early in the pandemic. Changed my website, so I lost the blog, but I still have it. But, really talking about quarantine depression, and we're cut off from things. It's nice when we have the option to not make plans. But then when we're told you can't make plans, it kind of becomes a whole different animal that we're trying to contend with.
Yeah, a definite battle in the head, right? I should be happy, everyone's healthy.
Right.
But I'm still feeling anxious.
Oh, those shoulds.
Shoulds. We should all over ourselves all the time.
Always. I love that phrase.
Stop the should.
Yeah.
I do want to back up. You mentioned the DSM.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just explain for those who
don't know? So DSM is just the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So that's where you'll find all the mental health diagnoses, the symptoms, all that stuff. It's on my shelf. It's a pretty thick book. In grad school, we were asked to read it intensely, but which is helpful. But yeah, so it kind of just lists out all the symptoms, and remember, like, anxiety, depression, these aren't necessarily feelings. They're labels for a category of symptoms. And people get that confused. You're like, I'm anxious. You're experiencing anxiety, right? Like, you are not anxiety. Mm-hmm. I feel depressed, or I feel anxious. These things start to kind of take on a form of their own, the way people kind of connect to them and attach to them, which makes it even harder to work through them and get rid of them. And so it's interesting when we actually say, no, like, these are just symptoms, and we start attacking the symptoms in therapy, then they start going away, and we can kind of create a little bit of separation between the person and the symptoms. Can
you talk a little bit more about that, separating the two? Because I think that is pivotal. And if just to share some tools that someone might be able to recognize and start implementing some tools.
Yeah, there's actually an approach to therapy called the narrative therapy approach, and it really does externalize the problem, right? The problem is the problem. We aren't the problem. So depression is the problem. Anxiety is the problem. And so when we can kind of create that little bit of separation, then we can sort of put in, like, there's so much more to a person than the symptoms that they struggle with or the feelings that they have. And so when we really start to kind of tackle symptoms, a lot of it's behavioral change, right? Avoidance is a huge piece of anxiety. It's one of the biggest behavioral components, right? So if I'm anxious, I'm going to avoid. The more I avoid, the more anxious I get about the thing that I'm avoiding. So it's that kind of cycle that we try to disrupt.
Snowball effect.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. So those symptoms, they can be kind of tackled one at a time, right? Like issues with sleeping, issues with eating. We can sort of tackle those as we go, put in some behavioral changes. However, we really do want to get to the root of it, right? How did this start? Where did it come from? Why is it still here? And from there, I kind of, at least me personally, I try to kind of tackle both simultaneously.
With your clients or with yourself?
With my clients and myself. I definitely practice what I preach.
So you just asked like 3 different questions in a row. Could you repeat those just so people can write them down and be like, okay, I am going to ask myself these questions and do a little bit of journaling on them so I can gain a little more clarity.
You talking about like, where did this come from?
Where did this come from? Like what, if you could direct that question a little deeper, where did this come from?
Yeah.
Did it start when you were a child? Did it start during COVID? Like, if you could
Right.
just give a little more direction on those questions, because what I found in my practice is that the journaling, the pausing, the thinking time
Yeah.
is so impactful. And it's the
Yeah.
questions that we're asking, the
Mhm.
quality of the questions that give the quality of the answer.
Right. And so one of the questions I always kind of start with clients is, when did this start? Right. So when did you start noticing these symptoms? When did you start feeling this way? To what degree are they interfering in your life? Because someone could have stress, but it's not keeping them from tending to their relationships, or it's not, really interfering in a significant way. So definitely want to get an assessment of that. Really looking at, what is it that I'm experiencing? So really kind of being able to put a label on, okay, well, I'm actually noticing I wake up frequently throughout the night, every night, and this has been happening for 2 years. It's like, okay, that's a big issue, because now you're sleep deprived almost every day, going on
Right.
years. So, really kind of trying to label the actual things that you're struggling with. Because I know sometimes we're so quick to go through our day of like, yeah, I didn't sleep well last night. It's like, whoa, let's kind of talk about that and see what effect that's having on you and how long that's going on. Um,
It is amazing how we can completely dismiss, we haven't been sleeping well for 2 years,
yeah,
and just keep plowing on through and not really just truly stop and look at what is going on, because that impacts every area of our life. If we don't have the
right.
energy, the focus, and the clarity, how do we
Yeah,
even dig deep on what's going on with us? So I say,
right.
welcome, Christine Golden. Thanks so much for joining us. She said she just hopped on. I am super excited as well, Christine. I am thrilled to have Darcy here and really talking about this incredibly important issue.
Yeah, it's interesting how we can sort of just, we're quick sometimes to incorporate something into the norm, right? It's like, oh yeah, I didn't sleep well last night, and that kind of becomes the norm, and then you go on that way. And
Mhm.
yeah, I've been frustrated with my job for a couple of years. Like these things just kind of keep piling up. And fortunately and unfortunately, the pandemic forced a lot of people to kind of sit and look at things that maybe they hadn't before. So you see a lot of people who moved, a lot of people who changed jobs, a lot of people who, really kind of reevaluated the ways in which they're living their lives. A lot of divorce, unfortunately, and so it's been interesting just to kind of see what toll it's taken on people, and what realizations have come out of it.
I've seen a lot of people who, if they were having struggle in their relationships, the pandemic completely imploded it. And if they had some
Mhm.
solid foundation, they were able to work through. And that goes for the business as well, right? So if we've got
Yeah,
that foundation there, but it is so important to pause and look at what is going on with us and
yeah,
just question that and invite the conversation.
yeah, big time.
What are some of the misconceptions that you hear about anxiety?
Um, I think the biggest one that kind of grinds my gears sometimes is just this myth that it comes out of nowhere. It's like, actually, that's not true, and really kind of backtracking and starting to identify, comes from our thoughts. It comes from the perceptions we hold. Anxiety has a very anticipatory nature to it. And so I like to kind of say, anxiety, we tend to live in the future when we have anxiety. We tend to live in the past a little bit when we experience some depression. And so anxiety does have that element of, you're probably thinking about something that's causing the anxiety symptoms. Um, Even just having parents modeled anxiety, if they had parents, like, there is a root cause. There are things that are triggering it. And when we have this perception of, oh, my anxiety comes out of nowhere, it almost renders us helpless. Be like, well, where is this secret entity that is kind of triggering my anxiety? It kind of seems really overwhelming.
If I can just ask you a little bit, do
Yeah.
you think part of that might be, and I ask this question often with my clients, is it keeping them safe, right? If they avoid it, they don't have to look deep into what's truly going
Sure.
on, and
Yeah.
then they can just sort of keep plowing on through.
Yeah. Because remember, when we start to tackle something, then we have to make change, right? And a lot of people don't like change. And so, you're right. There is somewhat of a self-preservation in this. There's sort of this entity out here in the ether that is causing my anxiety. I don't know what it is. It just kind of comes out of nowhere. It's generalized, and it's like, yes, to some degree, I understand the protective nature of that. And it's sort of keeping us in that pattern of I'm anxious and I avoid, I'm anxious and I avoid, I'm anxious and I avoid, and I'm afraid of the unknown and I'm afraid of this. And so it's probably a familiar chaos to people, and that's why they stay there. But yeah, I mean, there are definite causes, and that's what we kind of want to jump into and really identify is what that is. I think another myth too is when people assign their anxiety to something in particular, right? And so it's like, oh, I don't want to give a presentation at work, right? It makes me anxious. Essentially, what the way I've really kind of come to conceptualize it is that we're afraid of feeling. We're afraid of feeling uncomfortable. We're afraid of feeling embarrassed. We're afraid of feeling that we failed in some way or feeling inadequate in some way, afraid of feeling judged. And so when we really look at what's kind of more that root cause of anxiety, it's almost this fear of feeling. Sometimes it's fear of feeling anxious, but ultimately it really does come down to if we can tackle emotions, if we can learn how to have a healthier relationship with them, learn how to increase that self-confidence piece, you actually start to see the anxiety dissipate quite a bit.
It's amazing when you really focus at it head on. What can really happen? It's uncomfortable in the moment. But I have found, and would love your feedback on this, with my clients, there's a lot of fear moving forward, whether it's expanding a business, letting go of a business, whatever it may be. And what I find is that fear that stops us actually creates that which we are most trying to avoid, right? The failure, because we're not putting ourselves out there. We're not doing the work. We're not digging deep on gaining clarity of what's going on for us. Would you say that you have experienced that with your clients? And if so, what are some tools that you might be able to suggest?
Yeah, the fear stops us tremendously, and then it kind of becomes the only thing we focus on. I'm so afraid of my business failing. Well, that's kind of where your eyes are all the time. You're almost sort of like keeping failure in the corner of your eye, saying, nope, stay over there. But ultimately we go where our eyes go, right? And so where our focus is, and when our focus is on trying to avoid something, that's kind of where we go. And so when we talk about overcoming that fear, what we're saying is, let's learn how to have a healthier relationship with it, right? Fear can tell us, hey, there might be some risk here. Let's evaluate. Great. We can listen to that emotion. But ultimately, when that emotion kind of takes the steering wheel, that's where we start to get into a little bit of trouble.
A lot of trouble, definitely. And I agree with you. Fear actually is a gift. If we can take that meta view, if we can get ourselves out from the moment and look at it and say, what is triggering that fear? It's trying to keep us safe.
Sure. Yep. That fear response is necessary to some degree. However, with anxiety, remember, it's anticipatory fear. So I'm anticipating something fearful, something that I don't want, and when we talk about what that is, especially with business, right? So we anticipate making a wrong choice, or we anticipate failure, right? We've come to make those terms very subjective and weighted, right? Because what's wrong for one is right for another. And if we actually, what I work on with clients is taking that piece out of it. There really isn't a wrong choice, because the only person that's going to say, hey, that was a wrong choice is probably you after it doesn't go the way you want it to go. And so sometimes what we actually fear is what we're going to experience up here if it doesn't go the way we think it should or the way we want it to. And so I really work with clients, first and foremost, let's strip out subjective language. Let's strip out that, thanks to RuPaul, the inner saboteur, right? Like really kind of taking that piece out of it. Because if we don't fear how we're going to treat ourselves at the end of it, then we actually have a little bit more confidence going into it. That we're not going to hear that inner voice, that critique, that judgment, that shame that might come with, God, why did you do that? That was so stupid. You just ruined your whole business. And that's the voice that's so unnecessary, because it doesn't do anything for us.
And then we make choices from that energy. Right. And only create more of the same. You mentioned RuPaul. He has a great masterclass.
Yes.
Which is just phenomenal. It's so good. So good.
Yeah.
I want to back up a little bit and talk about something you mentioned just a few minutes ago, that anxiety piece. We're either focusing on the present or we're focusing on the past.
Yeah.
Excuse me, focusing on the future or focusing on
Right.
the past, right? How do we anchor ourselves in the present? Because I agree with you 100%. We're anticipating something, or we are reliving something. What are some tools that people can implement to anchor themselves in the moment? Is there a question? Is there something that can help them live more in the present?
Yeah. So I'm going to use this term, even though I know it's become so trendy. It's mindfulness. All right. There's a lot more to it than actually really gets described and talked about in a lot of forums. And so it's part of dialectical behavior therapy. It's one of the modules, which is what I practice with. And so I do a lot of work with it, but there's so much more to it. And a big piece of it is stripping out that judgmental language, right? And so when we live in the present, we're learning how to live in reality on reality's terms, which people with anxiety, we tend to like control. And so that throws people off sometimes. Yep, I'm right there, and so when we have to kind of live in reality and accept reality on its terms, that's when we actually start to get that sense of control, is how we respond to it, right? Can I stay present even though it's uncomfortable? And so just kind of learning distress tolerance skills. How do I stay present in a difficult moment without jumping to work or jumping to my phone or jumping to food or jumping to substances? It is a lot of that being grounded in whatever is occurring. One thing that I tend to really work on with clients is I have them there's a skill called push away. And so I have them make a worry box. And I say, if you're ruminating on something, if there's something that comes up and you just can't get it out of your head, put it in your worry box, right? It could be metaphorical. It could be the notes app on your phone, or you can actually make a box and write it down and put it in there.
Love that idea.
Yeah. And then give yourself an hour of worry time throughout the week, pull the things out of the box. If it's something you're ready to take action on right then and there, sit with it during that hour and say, okay, I'm going to call the vet and make the appointment, right? Or, okay, I'm going to send this email to my boss asking for the raise, or maybe I'm just going to type it up. Or maybe I'm not ready yet to send the email.
Leave it in the draft folder, but that is such a step, even putting it down on paper.
Yeah. And sometimes people think they have to conquer the whole mountain, and it's like, just get a map. Like, that's step one, just get a map of it, and so sometimes we set ourselves up for failure when we bite off more than we can chew. And so kind of having that worry box and throwing it in there. And I've had clients who say, I pulled one of the things out and I don't even know why I put it in there. It's really not that big of a deal, but it feels like that in the moment. And so we write it down and put it in there, and you might pull it out and be like, crumple it up, be like, that's really not a non-issue. And if you're not ready to take action on it, put it back in the box, or put the little thing that you did take action on, put something else in the box related to that, right? Like, okay, I got to hit send and put that in the box. We'll come back to that, next week during the worry hour.
Yeah, I love it. Our perception is our reality in the moment. It is real, even if what's going on isn't actually real. One of and I always get this woman's name mixed up, Byron Katie or Katie Byron. I think it's Byron Katie. Her story is absolutely fascinating. And her thing is I think it's called The Work.
Okay.
And the question is it so? Is it really so? So you can kind of keep playing it out and asking, is that thought truly so? And if you can just pause and really tease it out, it brings us back. Like you have that worry jar or whatever it was that you called it, so that you can take it out of your head, put it in there, and then come back to it. Is that really so? And be able to fully question it. And I love what you said, which is, if you're not ready to deal with it, put it back in. It is real for you. So on with that. But that doesn't mean that you have to get anchored by it.
Right. Yeah. I like that. Is it so? It reminds me of the skill in DBT, which is checking facts. Is this a fact? Because anxiety likes to fill in the gaps of things we don't know. And so we create narratives, we create stories, and man, the stories we can come up with sometimes.
Fascinating. When I catch myself, I can literally be like, where on earth did that come from? Like,
exactly.
But the trick, and it's been years that I've been working on this, is being able to pause, even just for a few seconds. It disrupts those well-worn neural pathways and allows us to step back momentarily and ask, is it so?
Right. Yeah. And it's hard to do that because anxiety says go, go, go. Right. When we start to get anxious, we almost speed up. And the biggest counter to that is I even say to clients, go slow, seconds before you answer a question. Type slow, walk slowly, like genuinely start sending the message to your brain. We can slow down, we can breathe. It's okay.
I love that. That alone is
Yeah.
such an amazing tool. Just that disruptor. I'm okay.
Yeah.
In this moment, I'm okay.
Right.
Can we ever really get rid of anxiety? Is that something that we can just be done with?
You'll probably get a million different opinions on this.
What's your opinion?
My opinion is yes, because fear, worry, the root origin, that's not going away. They're emotions. Stress, probably not going away. Anxiety is the degree to which it becomes unnecessary. And so I kind of really
Can you
work
repeat
with,
that?
yeah, anxiety is the degree to which the fear, worry, and stress become unnecessary. They become more hurtful than helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah. So in my opinion, we can navigate life without anxiety. We want healthy stress, right? We want healthy goals and fears. Like, sure, I feared failing out of grad school, right? We have those fears, but that's what drives me to study, right? And so it's okay to have fears of certain outcomes, but we don't necessarily want to get so caught up in catastrophizing and that image, because our brain actually can't really tell the difference between real and imagined. So if we're imagining these worst case scenarios, we're feeling it. We're feeling it as though it's happening in the present moment. And then we're going to respond to other people like that. I see that a lot in couples work. They
bet.
assume their partner is cheating, and so they're feeling, and so now they're going to talk to their partner as if they are, and it's it's hard to kind of ground back in and say, well, what's the reality? The reality is they didn't, right?
Right. I mean, just backing back up once you're down that rabbit hole is not an
Hard.
easy thing to do.
Yeah,
Definitely not.
it is very hard. So I do think we can get rid of it. I think that it takes a lot of work, and you might have some anxiety flare-ups, like, okay, yeah, I had a really anxious moment, I got really overwhelmed, or whatever it might be. And again, it's just a list of symptoms, and symptoms are temporary, right? And so we can experience symptoms momentarily without identifying with, oh yeah, I'm an anxious person, or I am anxiety. That's what we kind of want to differentiate.
Yeah, that whole belief system, that is something that I work on deeply with my clients and I have them fill out, I am a person who,
Mm.
and you've probably heard the quote, I am are two of the most powerful words because what follows is essentially so. And our beliefs drive our actions, our reactions, they even drive our opportunities, I believe. And when we're sitting in that belief of whatever is going on for us, it's not the safest place to be making a choice from. So my big word is pause, like you said earlier, even just for a few seconds, count just to 3 and create just enough space that you can disrupt it and start moving, at least having the opportunity to look in a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Darcy, are there any resources that you would recommend for people who would like to start exploring, whether it's a website, whether it's one of your articles, a book?
Yeah. So I definitely need to write more. I want to write more.
We would love to hear from you.
Yeah. But I'm actually reading a book right now called America the Anxious, and it's by Ruth Whitman. And she takes an interesting perspective because she's not a US citizen. She's from England. And so she moved over here when her husband got a job in LA. And she's a documentary filmmaker. And so she really had this interesting approach to kind of just studying and observing differences in culture and noticing our culture is driven by this pursuit of happiness. Yeah, and it's so ingrained. And she's like, every conversation I have is, what are you doing for you? What's your self-care? What's, and everyone she talks to is seeking this balance and seeking this, like, oh, I got to go to yoga 5 times a week. It'll make me happy. And so it's an interesting perspective to really look at even ways in which we perpetuate our own anxiety by trying to challenge the anxiety. And it kind of just becomes this really self-defeating, draining cycle. So I really like that book. If anybody wants to check it out, it's really interesting.
Can you repeat the name again?
Yep. It is America the Anxious
by
Ruth Whitman, Whippman.
Oh, okay. Whitman.
Whitman. Great. Yeah. Yep. So that's
I'm definitely going to read that. You mentioned it before. I think it sounds phenomenal.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed it. And, because it also kind of gives us the permission to back off, and it gives us the permission to reevaluate. If you go on Google and you say, how do I beat anxiety? 25 things to do, 7 things to do. You should do these 10 things. Invest in a really good therapist. Yeah. Get someone that can just work with you, because what works for you isn't going to work for your neighbor's best friend's cousin, right? So we want to be able to get that individualized approach, because we all do have our unique experiences within an umbrella mental health diagnosis, and so really kind of just getting in with someone who can really identify an individualized toolbox, things that are specific to your emotional state, your own emotional intelligence, what needs to be beefed up, what doesn't, really kind of getting in there and getting someone to just work with you is probably one of the best pieces of advice I can give.
I love that advice, because it's the same thing with business coaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
The structures, the systems, the habits that work for one person
Mm-hmm.
aren't going to work for everyone. It's the same thing with our mental health, is what's working for someone else. And like you said, here's the 27 things that you need to implement to get rid of anxiety. It's like, oh my gosh.
Right.
So really finding someone that will truly listen with the intent to understand you and see that golden thread that weaves the tapestry of your life, so that you can have that highlight, that loving, caring space to be able to step forward and explore that discomfort that comes with exploring what's going on for us.
Yeah. It's a big one.
So Darcy, is there any question that I didn't ask that you would have asked yourself?
I don't think so. Yes. Really good questions. Yeah, I don't think there is. I think ultimately it really comes down to understanding that, you also don't have to have a mental health diagnosis to go see a therapist. It's not required. And you might not receive one, and that's okay when you go. I would definitely say, if you're struggling, just seek help. There's a couple different directories. There's Psychology Today, goodtherapy.org. There's Therapy Den, which is really, really big on inclusivity and, speaking to marginalized groups, which is great. Therapy Tribe. I mean, there's a ton, and so definitely look at and look up and see what's around you. Build that relationship with someone, because across all the research studies, relationships do the most for anxiety and depression. We are social creatures.
We are. So true.
So yeah, that would be it.
Darcy, thank you so much for sharing your brilliance and really helping take the stigma out of mental health. It always blows me away. People will go for diabetes, they'll go for a broken arm, but when our mental health is struggling, we just keep it quiet, and that shame keeps us just perpetuating what's going on. So thank you really so much for bringing this forward and starting this conversation here. I really am grateful.
Not a problem. Thank you so much for having me and for celebrating Mental Health Awareness Month.
So where can people find you if they want to reach out, ask questions, check out is there a social platform, website, email, whatever?
Yeah. So they can go on my website, movingmountainshealing.com. I do have Facebook page, Instagram page. Have I kept up with it? Nope. But it is there. I still have access to it.
Comment on her page, so she'll get in there. And
there you go. Yeah, my website's probably the easiest. I definitely open to helping people, want to kind of connect with people. And if I can't help for some reason, whether I'm full or whatever, I at least like to give resources and referrals. I don't ever send a client away empty-handed. That's not something that I'm a big fan of. So even if they reach out and it's not a good fit for whatever reason,
I'm going to ask you to mention one thing that we talked about a week ago, that Vermont is now allowing people. Can you just share that for those in Vermont that are listening?
Yeah. So Vermont is a state that is allowing out-of-state providers, mental health providers, to treat Vermonters virtually. It goes through the end of March next year, 2022. But it's an incredible gift, because so many therapists are booked up. And so I like to just kind of let people know, like, you can start with a therapist who is not in Vermont. It's okay. State of Vermont, it's open. It's easy for any practitioner. So if you find a practitioner that's out of state you really like, you can even inform them, hey, there's this law that, Vermont is allowing out of state practitioners. Can we see each other at least through the end of March next year? It'll give you a good jump start, that way, if there is something acute or there is a lot of distress in the moment, definitely just kind of get in and start seeing someone.
Thank you. I just think that's so amazing. I'm really glad we were able to share that.
Yeah.
So thank you
I'm
so
glad
much.
you asked. Yeah, it's a great benefit that unfortunately I don't think they've advertised very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. And to everyone, next week, I'm taking a mental health week. I'm going on vacation to visit my boys out
Good.
west in Washington State. So there will be no live next week. But the following week, I'm going to be interviewing Christine O'Neill again. And we're going to be continuing on the Mental Health Month conversation. So I'd love to have you join us. We'll be posting that very soon. And to all of you, to your success, whatever success is for you, not what other people want, need, or expect, but what it is for you. And Christine, thanks so much for joining us. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye.